All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a daily Power Parsha, Monday, March 28th, 2022, which means, since it's Monday, that we're starting a brand new Parsha. And as the kids would say, the Parsha of the week is, and then we enter the name of the Parsha of the week, right? Parsha of the week is Tazria, 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 and Tazria talks about purity and impurity, a theme that follows from the end of last week's Torah portion. The commentaries point out something interesting, and you'll recall this because, from last week's Torah portion, we talked about kosher animals and non-kosher animals, kosher fish, non-kosher fish, kosher birds, non-kosher birds. We talked about creepy, crawly things that aren't kosher. And then the Torah talked about the impurity. Like if a dead animal, if a non-kosher dead animal touches the inside of a metal vessel, then the metal vessel is impure, etc. So it got very somewhat intricately involved in the laws of purity and impurity with regards to food, animals, birds, fish, that sort of thing. And so now this week, the Torah talks about impurities with regard to the human being. In other words, human tumah and tara, human impurity and impurity. And as the commentators point out, it follows the order of creation. Just like animals were created before human beings, the discussion of purity and impurity is discussed first with regards to the animals, and only then this week with the human being. So a little bit of a message in the juxtaposition. Let's begin. I'm going to share my screen. And let's jump into the Parsha. Tazria Torah reading. We're going to begin with reading number 1. And it starts with the laws of childbirth, which makes sense. Life begins with birth. And, all of us that are listening, that are learning, we were all born. Otherwise, how'd you get here? I would argue, right? Can't have gotten here without being born. And so here the Torah talks about the status of birth and purity and impurity surrounding the experience of conception and birth. Here we go. Leviticus chapter 12, verse number 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and of course, just to reiterate, that line means that God told this to Moses, saying, meaning to tell the people the following. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she shall be unclean. Now, unclean doesn't mean physical. And I really don't like this translation, unclean, because unclean has a literal connotation. Unclean in Hebrew is v'tam'ah, which is impure. Impure is not unclean. Impure is a spiritual impurity. It's not a physical thing. So she shall be unclean or impure, spiritually impure for 7 days. As in the days of her menstrual flow, she shall be unclean. Let's continue. The Torah tells us, switching away from the narrative about the mother to the narrative about the child for a moment. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin, the baby's foreskin, shall be circumcised. I was actually just at a bris yesterday. Interestingly enough, the Torah tells us that on the 8th day of the child's birth, after a child is born, after a son is born, that is the time to circumcise this little baby boy. Then we switch back to the mom. And for 33 days, she shall remain in the blood of purity. She shall not touch anything holy, nor may she enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification have been completed. So in other words, there are 7 days and 33 days, but either way, she remains in a state of impurity until that time period has elapsed. Now that's all with regards to giving birth to a baby boy. What if she gives birth to a girl? And if she gives birth, verse 5, if she gives birth to a female, she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, like her menstruation period. And for 66 days, she shall remain in the blood of purity. So essentially, for a boy, it's 7 plus 33, which is 40. And for a girl, it's 14 plus 66 for a grand total of 80, double the amount of time for the impurity. And again, this is only relevant, just to be clear here, this is not relevant today. This is relevant in ancient times when the state of purity and impurity was relevant vis-a-vis entering the temple or eating of the sacrifices, etc. One had to be in a state of purity, and this is very relevant to know when she can become in a state of purification after giving birth. The Torah then talks about the ritual of the purification ritual. And when the days of purification have been completed, in other words, after the 33 days with a boy or 66 days with a girl, whether for a son or for a daughter, whatever that time period is, after that period has passed, she shall bring a sheep in its first year as a burnt offering, and a young dove or a turtle dove as a sin offering to the entrance of the tent of meeting to the Kohen. So she brings these animals, actually an animal and a bird. She brings it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. And of course, if you can picture it, there's the large Mishkan area, the courtyard area under the sky. Toward the western side of the Mishkan, there is a covered building, a relatively small covered building. She brings the animals, or the animal and the bird, right outside that building. And she brings it to the Kohen. And he, the Torah says, he shall offer it up before the Lord and effect atonement for her. And thus she will be purified from the source of her blood. This is the law of a woman who gives birth to a male or to a female. The Torah says, and if she cannot afford a sheep, right? Man, who thought that having kids would be so expensive, right? So now she has a baby, now she has to bring a sheep and a bird. But if she can't afford a sheep, the Torah says she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. Instead of a sheep and a bird, take 2 of them, two doves or two turtle doves or 2 doves, one as a burnt offering and one as a sin offering. And the Kohen shall effect atonement for her, and she shall become clean. That is the ritual. Now, this little section of the Torah, the opening section of our Torah portion, certainly, without question, raises more questions than when we started. I mean, this certainly raises a whole host of questions, including, but not exclusive to, so one second. So she gives birth to a child and that makes her unclean or impure. Why? What does that even mean? Why is she rendered impure? Impure usually is associated with death, not life. You come in contact with a dead, right? Come in contact with a dead carcass of an animal that's not kosher, so then it renders a certain impurity for a certain amount of time. Okay.
So is there not a vegetarian option in all of this?
As far as bringing like a meal offering only?
Yeah,
it seems like there is not. Certain offerings have that third option or a fourth option, whatever it is. This one doesn't. It's just the sheep /goat or sorry, let me try this again. It's either the sheep, not a goat, sheep plus dove or turtle dove, or 2 turtle doves, right? Yeah, there's no vegetarian option, so to speak. Yeah, no vegan option for this offering. But the question here is, why is she rendered impure having a child? Like, what does that even mean? What's going on here? So I want to share with you something that I shared certainly last year, something that is a core understanding when it comes to the Jewish idea of purity and impurity. And that is that, as I mentioned just a moment ago in the question, it's always associated with an absence or interruption of life. You see, what does purity and impurity mean? What does it mean to be tahar or tameh? So it's all about alignment and being plugged into the source of life. As we know, Judaism believes that God is the source of life, not just once upon a time, but constantly the source of life. Any disruption to that, right, renders one in a state of impurity. We spoke in last Wednesday's class about the spiritual meaning of the red heifer. We said every sin is like a death, and therefore falling sin, tshuva, is like the red heifer. So we spoke along those lines. But in today's conversation, purity and impurity is basically the difference between life and a disruption to life. So anything that is no longer living renders the one who comes in contact with it impure. But now the question is even stronger. So what's with childbirth? The commentaries say, and this is a little bit of an interesting concept, that childbirth, think about it, a mother is carrying life inside of her, and then she births that child, please God, in a healthy fashion, right? Now that child lives and exists outside of her. Now, the child, please God, the child is healthy and everything's great. But for her, she lost a life that was within her. And again, I understand that that life is now living outside of her, please God. But vis-a-vis her own body, there was life being carried, and now she's no longer carrying that life. That itself constitutes a disruption or an absence to life or to some part of life inside of her, and renders her in a state of impurity for a certain amount of time. So again, purity and impurity is a highly sensitive measure. You know, like earthquake is, what is that? A counter, what is it? Geiger counter, whatever it's, something like that. Whatever. So it's like some sort of
Seismometer.
Right? It's a highly sensitive needle that responds to any disruption on any level to life. And if there's a disruption, it goes off. And so childbirth is a disruption. Why? Because she's, for lack of better terminology, she's growing, developing, building this life inside of her, additional life inside of her. And now it's birthed out, please God, in a healthy way. But that means that within her, the life is no longer there. That disruption sets off the counter, sets off that life, that sensitive life meter. And now it renders her impure. And now there's a ritual. Every time, I mean, in ancient times, there's a ritual. You have to wait a certain amount of days, and then you have to do a certain protocol, and then impurity. And what it does is it sensitizes us, without getting the details. I don't know if I can explain 33 versus, the exact span of days, although I have an insight on 33 versus 66. But without getting into to all of the details, because ultimately these are divine decrees that some element will remain outside of our understanding. The point for us is to sensitize us, even if we don't practice it exactly like this today, to sensitize us to life, to heighten our appreciation and sensitivity for life. And let me frame it along these terms. We live in a culture that very often glorifies death. What do I mean by glorifies death? We live in a culture in which death symbols are used oftentimes as decor, especially certain times of year, right? Certain times of year, death symbols become decorations to pick up at the party store, right? Rip and skeletons and grave sites and bones and everything. It's kind of like, it's almost like look, there were ancient cultures that literally glorify death, like the ancient Egyptians at the times of the Exodus, when the Jews were living, right? They glorified death. Death was something, they mummified the bodies, they preserved the bodies. It was all about like preserving almost that lifelessness, beautifying death. Whereas in Judaism, death is not beautified. Death is acknowledged and it's mourned. The loss is mourned and it's respected, but it's not beautified. That's why, for example, in Judaism, we don't have this notion of, let's say, an open casket or a viewing and that sort of thing. We don't dress up the deceased. It's simple white shrouds and laying the person to rest. So Judaism, I think, strikes an interesting balance, not between, it's not being ignored, but it's also not being beautified. It's being acknowledged in a very simple, realistic way. And it's almost like this approach heightens us to be sensitive to life and to glorify life. So Judaism really glorifies life, acknowledges and respects the experience of death, and there's a lot about that, certainly, but the beautification and the glorification is always about life. So that's why Judaism never produced a movement of seeking martyrdom, right? Seeking to be a martyr. There's no glory in a kamikaze. It's just a different type of society. Judaism is not about seeking death. It's not a death-seeking society or movement. It's all about life. That's why when it comes to Torah and mitzvot, as everyone here knows, you suspend a mitzvah to save a life, right? You break the mitzvah to save a life with very, very rare exceptions. And only like extreme exceptions do you not violate a mitzvah. Otherwise, the Torah says, v'chai bahem, live with the Torah, live with the mitzvot. If it's going to take a life, then don't do it. Don't do it. There I am in Brooklyn, New York, in the heart of Crown Heights. Let's mention now, Shabbat in the Heights, join us, May 13th through 15th, the weekend in New York. Spend the Shabbos together with Leah and I, myself and Leah, and I'm not sure about the family, but let's get back. So there I am. This would have been almost 18 years ago, and I'm in Crown Heights, the heart of Chabad headquarters, and I've just finished a Shabbos meal along with my bride, my fairly newlywed wife, right? And we're after the meal, and Leah's sitting in a comfortable chair, and she says, "I think it's time." And I say, okay. Well, then let me get the phone, because this was Friday night. It was Shabbat already, and we had a Shabbos meal, but she was in labor. And she was like, it's go time. It's go time. And I'm like, okay, I guess I pick up the phone now, right? Shabbos? Okay, let's see if the phones work on Shabbos. And they did. I picked up the phone and I called a car service. Remember that? This is well before Uber. This was not 19. This was 18. No, this was 2004. May 14th, 2004. Yeah. Almost 18 years ago. I pick up the phone and I called the car service and they said, we have no cars available. So I'm like, oh, great. I got to make another phone call. So I hung up the phone. I called another car service. And finally, we got a car that whisked us away, just the two of us, to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital in Park Slope. A short drive from Crown Heights. That's where Leah's midwife group was working out of the hospital. So it was like kind of like a midwife touch with a hospital setting, nice combo for us. And we had already we'd already like checked everything out, but you pick up the phone, you get into a car, you pay the driver. Yeah, you don't stiff the driver, you pay the driver money on Shabbos. Money transactions are happening. And then you get there, then you get to the hospital. And you got to go to the third floor or second floor, for whatever it was. I don't know, who can remember? And you know what? You get into an elevator. And I was told that I'm allowed to ride with her in the elevator. Why? I mean, it's not but if that's going to make her feel more comfortable, right? If that's going to put her more at ease, then you get into that elevator also, right? You don't have to take the stairs. You get into that elevator, right? If she needs it, assuming that, and the assumption is that, yes, it would be helpful. Got into that elevator, and the rest is history. Moshe Nassan, it's his full name, was born Shabbos morning at like, Leah would know the exact time. I should, but I don't remember, like 5:40 or maybe 6:40 a.m., something, Shabbos morning, May 15, 2004. That's when he was born. That was almost 18 years ago, which means he's almost.
Can you believe he's almost 18?
I actually can't, because I still look at myself as just a little bit over 18, just a few years removed from 18. It's kind of crazy, but it's the reason why I'm telling this story is, well, number one, it's a story that's dear to my heart, but really not. Oh, and then the next day I went to shul that morning. I asked Leah, is she okay? She's like, yeah, totally. Like, go to shul. Say the blessing for healing, for Mishaberach and everything. So I walked. There was a Chabad shul in Park Slope, right, like a few blocks away. So I went to the synagogue, and man, I was the happiest guy in the world. I was beaming. You couldn't, like, I'm like, you want to ask why I'm so happy? And I was like, what happened? Like, my wife had a baby boy, and everyone's like, Mazda, and I'm like, Yeah, it's really, and I don't know. I felt like it was the first person ever to have a child, but it was a wonderful joy. But here's the point. Here's the point. The reason why I'm saying this is simply this: that you break Shabbos. I don't know. You break Shabbos. You suspend Shabbos to save a life. A doctor is allowed to have a phone on, allowed to take calls, you're saving lives. That's it. You're saving lives. Hatzalah. I don't know if you know what Hatzalah is. Hatzalah is the Jewish volunteer ambulance service that they have in many Jewish communities that are large enough to support it. And they live in the community and they service the community, and it's like instant response, especially in New York where you might wait a little bit. It's very, very helpful to have Hatzalah at the ready. These guys are well trained and integrated with the hospitals and everything, and they get things done.
And the woman one that we had the talk of.
I was just going to mention that, and as we recall, right, the Ruchi Fryer, the Honorable Judge Ruchi Fryer. So she started the women's one, which some of the guys were not happy about because, hashtag ego and such, but, whatever it is, they worked it out or didn't work it out, but it's happening anyway. But the point is that these guys on Shabbos in Shul, you'll hear the radio. They're wearing it. They're not hiding it. They're wearing it because to save a life, you suspend Shabbos. And you keep on there, you take the call and you talk back and forth, even if you don't know if it's life or death yet, right? You don't know how serious it is, how dangerous it is, but you got to do something even just in case. That's the level of suspension. The point here is really the reason why I'm saying all this is that Judaism is all about preserving life. It's all about life, protecting, upholding, preserving, keeping, sustaining, celebrating life. Judaism is obsessed with life. Not death, obsessed with life, respects death, honors death, etc., but is obsessed and celebrates life. And so any disruption to life is cause for pause and notice, pausing and taking note, and there's a ritual. And so in our tradition, even something as celebratory as childbirth renders the mother at that great state of joy in a state of impurity. That's not a sad state. Impurity doesn't mean like, that's really sad. No, it just means simply that we're acknowledging that there was an additional life that is no longer there. And thus that does something. That's not nothing, that's something.
Is it the same if you miscarry, God forbid?
Yeah, it would be the same. It would be the same. And this explains why the birth of a son is 33 days, but the birth of a daughter or a girl is 66 days. Why is it double? So it's interesting. I once saw this commentary. I love this commentary. Because a girl also has the potential, again, conceptually, potentially, to give birth. So if the mother's carrying a girl, she has not only is the mother carrying life, but carrying life that can also carry life. You with me on this? So it's double. Yeah, I understand that it takes two to tango and you also need the male contribution, so to speak, but that's not carrying life. I'll just be very honest here. Human species would quickly dry up if guys had to go through that. That's just the way that is. But the idea of carrying a girl, right, of being pregnant with a girl, is that you're the mother's not only carrying life, but carrying life that also is not carrying literally, but potential of another life. Hence the double amount of time. I was going to say double loss, but God, we're not talking about loss. I don't want to get things confused, but it's still a not displacement, maybe displacement. It's still a movement.
It's a separation.
It's a separation. Perfect. It's a separation. Life has been moved out. And that means something. And in Judaism, in the Torah, that means what we read, a measure of impurity. And so one thing to be very aware of is that impurity does not imply something bad. something less than, something ugly. On the contrary, are you kidding me? It's the greatest celebration. The greatest celebration. Birth. Oh, so we throw parties. Yeah. Bris, baby namings for girl, whatever. We throw parties. It's a celebration. It's a wonder. We sing Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Mazel Tov. Right? It's a joy. And also for the mother, it's not a joy, but there's a state of impurity. Just maybe to make it also some practical applications of purity and impurity is that we know life. We're so sensitive to life that even when we cut our nails, it renders us in a state of mini impurity. Even to this very day, when we cut our fingernails or toenails, what's happening is a separation of life. Think about it, right? This was growing, it's part of our body, right? It was growing and we cut it off, whether it's nails or hair, we cut it off. So that renders a person in a state of impurity. Now that's a very small state of impurity because it's not like a lot of life. It's very, we can cut it because it's very desensitized. So it's not a highly, when a mother is carrying a life inside of her, that's a lot of life that's now been separated out. When you cut a fingernail, it feels dead. You don't feel it, right? So all you need to do is wash the hands, the ritual hand washing. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? A few times, back and forth, 3 times. And that's and that lifts that. So, and just so you know, every time we cut our nails, cut our hair, or even bath or shower, after that, it's appropriate to also wash. That also renders this one in a state of impurity, mini impurity. I don't know. I wonder why when bathing or showering, maybe it's because maybe skin is coming off as we kind of scrub or whatever it is, right? Maybe this is the Torah's way of telling us to exfoliate. I don't know. I'm kidding. But maybe it's something, something along those lines that then also triggers that. But that's the tradition, times. Obviously, we do it in the morning. Every morning when we wake up, we do it ideally by the bed, but also later on with the blessing in the morning. And then we do it every time we cut our nails, cut our hair, and also shower or bathe. Okay, now I saw in the comments, so Sarah asked a good question, which is, are we supposed to bury them? The answer is yes. When it comes to nails, so there's a very interesting Jewish tradition. I don't know if you would call it superstition or tradition, but it basically says that cutting nails and allowing them to fall on the floor where somebody could step on it is actually dangerous. Not physically dangerous. I don't know if anybody ever said, oh, I tripped on a fingernail. I don't think that's a thing. Or ow, what's that sharp thing in my foot? I mean, all of those are distinct possibilities, but I don't think that's what it means. It really means more of a spiritual, it's like negative spiritual energy to have the nails stepped on. So therefore, the ideal is to kind of get rid of them. One way to do that is by burning them, or by burying them, or by otherwise maybe flushing them down the toilet or whatever it is, but just getting rid of them. They're not necessarily holy to the point that it requires burial. Like we would say, obviously, like a body, or even, not even, but also like a Jewish book, a holy book needs to be buried and laid to rest like that. A nail or a hair doesn't need to be laid to rest like the body, but it does need to be, nails certainly need to be eliminated from circulation, so to speak, that it doesn't harm. It says that the Chassidim, the Talmud says, I think he used the word Chassidim, pious, not necessarily like we would use the term today, but like pious individuals would burn their nails. I can't say I burn them on the regular. I usually just flush them down the toilet, that sort of thing, or just get rid of them otherwise. But yeah.
Is there some reason you just can't put them in the garbage on a paper towel?
You could, but I guess the concern is maybe they're going to get back somehow into circulation. Maybe they'll fall out or whatever it is. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's really just making sure that they're not in a place that's accessible or available. But that's another example of something that renders a person, of course, in a mini state of impurity that's very practical today. Yeah. basically, anytime you'll encounter the terms pure and impure in Torah and Judaism, it's always about life. It's always about life. I mean, you know, for women, for men, it's always about some sort of, you know, separation or something regarding life. And of course, the big one is encountering straight up, you know, death, you know, human body, which happens. And you know, one modern form of that is walking into a hospital. The assumption is when walking into a hospital that there's somebody who's not alive in the hospital, and you're under the same roof, and that renders one in the most severe status of impurity. That's why we assume today that everyone's in the status of impurity, but we don't need to get out of that state of impurity because we don't have a temple. So we'll all need a red heifer someday when Mashiach comes, but not, you know, for right now, we don't have that need. There are certain impurities that we do need to get rid of today because it stands in the way of other things. And that's why mikvah, and that's why we have, you know, hand washing and that sort of thing. So there is water-based purities that are done to this very day, but some of them are not relevant because there's no temple. Troy, did you want to ask something?
Back to an earlier comment about the what is it, 7 days and then 33 days, that's 40 days, and then for a female it's 80 days. There's a lot of 40 days all over the place.
A lot of 40 days. 40 really is associated with birth, with life, because 40, so interesting. 40 is associated with, you know, Moses was on the mountain getting the Torah for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the golden calf. But 40 is kind of like birth or like rebirth or something. The flood was on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. It says that when it comes to physical conception and procreation, so gender is not determined and other things are not determined until about 40 days, which matches up scientifically with when the cells begin, my understanding, when the cells begin to differentiate in gender. The Talmud says that up until 7 weeks, is it 7 weeks or 6 weeks? No, sorry, it doesn't say 6 or 7 weeks, it says 40 days. Up until 40 days, one is allowed to pray for a gender. But after that, you're praying for nothing. It's not going to change, right? But one can pray, I want a boy, I want a girl, up to the first 40 days. But after that, it's a bracha levatala. It's a prayer for nothing, because it's already set. That ship has sailed. But it's interesting. I've looked it up, that science, and some of you may know this, and certainly Dr. Maxey, right? But like literally biologically, up until, you know, those first 40 days or so, it's wide open as far as, you know, what those cells look like and whatever. It's very much open-ended. That's my basic understanding based on Google or Google MD. Whatever that is. Okay. So yeah, 40 is very significant. 40 is kind of like that, you know, that incubation stage, right? So we're like incubating a state of purity for the mother, and then it's double incubation period. I don't know if I like that word incubation, whatever, but it's like that double experience giving birth to a girl. None of this is bad. That's why impurity equals unclean equals bad is not the Jewish understanding. That's not what Torah means. It's not like, oh, impure, unclean, bad. That may be what we think, but that's not what this is. This is all good stuff.
So help me understand. In that time, was she not allowed to go to the temple and participate? I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Correct. Yes. Correct. She was in a
So
state of
you are
purity.
temporarily separated from corporate service to Hashem.
Yeah. And maybe the message there is, you know, the at-home connection is what needs to be cultivated. And maybe
that's the service you're supposed to be performing at that moment, and not
anyway
one
with
in
a
the
child.
temple.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's, I think, a good insight that's coming up from your question. I think your question kind of points to a direction that makes sense. And I can't say that's the only rationale, that's the only angle on it, but I think your question highlights a really beautiful thing, right? It's not going to corporate, it's not going to out there service. And maybe that's the message, creating that home environment, right? You have a little child now, you're going to be creating this house, this home now needs to become a temple.
So why we also don't have set times for prayers, because we're already serving Hashem when we're raising our children.
Getting up at 3 a.m., is no less, dear God, why am I getting, no, whatever, is no less of a prayer, right? Or a service, an act of service, than ritualized service. One could argue it's more of a service. It's more of a service, right? It's taking care of God's kids. There was once a parent. Who felt he was struggling, a dad who was struggling with, a little bit of anger outburst to his kids. He was struggling with a temper to his kids. So he went to the Rebbe and I know who this is, because he told the story about himself. I'm not going to share the name, even though it's a public story, but it's not relevant. So he went to the Rebbe for advice. What do I do about I recognize it's a problem. Like, what should I do? Rebbe gave him a meditation, very interesting meditation. He said, imagine this was somebody else's kid. Would you shout at them? Would you use, physical, whatever it is, you wouldn't. So these are Hashem's kids. These are God's kids. You've been entrusted for, whatever it is amount of time to to raise them to the point that they're, ready to go. And of course, parenting never ends, whatever, but, you've been entrusted. These are God's children that take residence in your house, right? Think about it that way. And that can be a paradigm shift. Like, these are not my kids. These are God's kids that have been entrusted to me. A bit of a different take on this. And that can, maybe now we think twice about what we say, what we do, etc. That's a powerful perspective on this. And I think it also pertains to what we're saying. Waking up at 3 a.m. to feed the baby is feeding God's child. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful act of service. That's a selfless act of service and a form of prayer and meditation as well, right? That is something beautiful and profound. So that's maybe what comes up here, from this discussion. That's a beautiful statement. That's a beautiful statement that Torah is making. You don't have to seek God in the temple in Jerusalem, right? Now you can find God or create that space, create that mishkan in your own home, right? You don't need to find that. It's not like my home is a house, but the temple, the synagogue, the space is there. No, that was also one of the messages of COVID, right? At least, in the early stages when we were like positive messages, right? It was like, oh, we can find God at home and we can experience God at home and prayer at home. And there's no synagogue and it's just all at home. Torah study and prayer and good deeds and charity and everything is all like based out of the house, which it always is. But that kind of like enhances it. And so the message is, no, you don't need to go to the temple, and you can't even go, even if you wanted to. Now is not the time to go outside. It's time to cultivate and nurture within. Okay, so that is the opening little bit. Let's go back inside and let's continue the reading. We're up to chapter 13. Oh, look at this. It's really a somewhat new topic. Now we talk about Sarat. Okay, hold on. I know I just literally put up my screen, but let me back that down for a second. The next little bit, and it's not only a little bit, the next stretch into next week's Torah portion also is going to talk about Sarat. What is Sarat? Sarat is, well, typically translated as leprosy. It's not leprosy. It's a spiritual malady that afflicted the skin that may have shared some similarities with leprosy, but was a spiritual malady. Now, why would a person be afflicted with Sarat? So the classic classic root of this was the idea of Lashon Hara, speaking ill of someone else. Speaking negatively about someone else would be one of the indiscretions that could trigger a spiritual response of tzarat. It wasn't the only one. There's a whole list. Our sages in the Medrash and Talmud discuss a whole list of things that could lead to tzarat. But the classic ones, the classic cause is speaking ill, speaking negatively of someone else. In fact, we see in the Torah this on multiple occasions. When Moses was speaking with God, was negotiating with God at the burning bush for 7 days, at some point, God says, put your hand in your cloak and pull it out, and it turned white. And Moses like freaks out, and then he says, okay, put it back in, and then it was normal. That was in response to Moses saying, don't send me. There's no point. The people are not going to believe in this anyway. The people are not going to believe in redemption, not going to believe in exodus and liberation. And so God says, now you're speaking ill about a whole people, that they're non-believers. Tzarat for you. And then when Miriam speaks negatively about her brother much later on, right? She's like says, oh, I heard, she speaks to her brother Aaron about Moses. So also she gets afflicted with tzarat. And that's another example. But we see biblically that people get tzarat when they speak negatively about someone else. So that's why that's the most prominent and most oft discussed cause of tzarat. We don't get tzarat nowadays. We don't get tzarat. The understanding is like this. It's beautiful, beautiful. It's like, it's also a wake-up call for us, but a very profound insight has it that it's when there's a sensitivity that the impurity rises to the surface. I'm going to say that may be clear. If, let's say you have a very healthy diet, and then you eat a slice of pizza, like that's gonna it's gonna mess things up, because it's so clean, the body is so clean and pure that one little thing, renders it's visible that you ate something wrong. As opposed to if we're and again, it's not a judgment, I'm just saying, but like if we're not so careful what we eat, then it's just one more thing. So back in the day, people were so pure that the moment they spoke negatively about someone, like it affected their skin. They broke out. It shows a sensitivity. Today, unfortunately, it's just something normal that we speak about people. You guys saw what happened last night with, I'm kidding, right? Well, we speak about people and that's, it almost becomes the norm, so that it's not just skin deep. The tzarat is real. It's inside, not only on the outside. So
what about other things that are going on today, like over in the Ukraine and all of the information we receive and individuals that are responsible, or what happened in Germany 90 years ago?
Yeah. So when it comes to Lashon Hara, so it's not a prohibition to speak about something that needs to be spoken about in the sense that it's a danger and people need to be warned about it, or something needs to be done. Or even for that matter, public information. I mean, something that's literally public information, like what happened last night, would not fall under the category of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is really about something that is not public information, that one is divulging to someone else, that's negative and it's hurtful and whatever it is, and even if it's true, that idea is where it gets into that category. The Chafetz Chaim, who was a great scholar of the last, lived in the 1800s, he writes extensively on this topic. He was big into this idea of watch what you speak, so to speak. And he really gets into like the ins and outs, like what is over the line, what's not over the line. But a lot of conversations that we have, I mean, present company excluded, a lot of conversations that people have could at least be borderline Lashon Hara. To be careful.
What made the biblical time the people purer there then?
Well, I think this is a bit of this is something that we find in general in Jewish thought, that back in the day, people were spiritually on a higher level. The further we get from those great experiences of Sinai and the great tzaddikim of patriarchs and Moses, and the further we go, the more we become a little bit more spiritually corrupt. It's not a terribly inspiring way of looking at things, but that's one way of looking at
it. makes sense in the fact that we are looking to the Torah from that time to inspire us.
Yeah. And we don't have prophets today, like there's a lot of stuff that a lot of spiritual, we don't have a temple and miracles and that sort of thing. It's a lot of stuff that they had back in the day. They were in a bit of a higher level.
But they also had a lot of bad attributes.
Well, here's the thing. What's interesting is that I think we spoke about this last week also, is that sometimes the bad that we see or that Torah highlights, for us wouldn't even make a blog, right? It's the
we don't understand all the levels.
The Kutzker said, I think the Kutzker said, the Kutzker Rebbe once said, very sharp, I think it was him, from the sins of the those who left Egypt, God made a Torah. From our mitzvahs, no one's writing anything. You see what I'm saying? Like their sins are on such a higher level than even our. Again, I understand that sounds weird or counterintuitive or whatever it is, but Moses hit the rock and he sinned and he got banned from Israel. I've given this example before. It's like a scratch and a diamond. A scratch and a diamond, you notice the scratch, right? A scratch on a piece of coal, just another piece of coal. Just another coal with a crack or an imperfection. You go to a jewelry store and you pick up a ring, or earrings or whatever it is, jewelry, right? Donna, come on, right? Jewelry, and the stone is cracked. You'll be like, forget about it. When you come home with the briquettes of the barbecue, the coal, and you pour it into your Weber, and there's one of the coals is split in half. You don't put it all back in the bag and take it back to Publix. Be like, I got a cracked piece of coal. What is this? You're like, it's fine. It's just coal. It's fine. It's just coal. But a cracked diamond, that puppy's going back. I don't know, puppy, whatever. That piece of jewelry, you're not buying it. You can't sell it. It's because it's a diamond. They're diamonds. Everything is like a flaw. Every little thing could be, every little slight imperfection, you notice. Us, we're not on that level. So it's the same thing. It's actually a perfect example. Any slight talk that they did, it hit the skin. It's like they broke out in hives. They broke out in a rash. Spiritually.
Did they know that's why they were breaking out?
Yeah. Moses told them. That's why the Torah discusses cases where people are going to try to hide it. It says first it would hit the skin. If someone tried to cover it up with clothing, then it hit the clothing. If someone tried to cover up with something else, then it hit the house. At some point, right? At some point, you got to own up and face the music and do the change. All right, let's do a little bit. I know we're at the time, but let's do a few verses just so we finish reading one, even though we're switching gears to Tzarat, but I think it's good. Let's do it. Let's do it inside, and then we'll close it out. Okay, so the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, new topic. If a man has great. Thank you for translating. If a man has a sa'it, a sapachat, or a baheret on the skin of his flesh, three different types of this, the physical appearance, right? And it forms a lesion of tzarat on the skin of his flesh. So he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. So step one is not a dermatologist, because that's not going to help. There's no cream for that. That's not the issue. Yes, there are things that you need a good doctor and a dermatologist. Here you need a Kohen. This is not a physical thing. You need a Kohen. A Kohen is marked by love. That's the hallmark of a Kohen is love. So you need a Kohen to speak to someone who's been speaking bad about someone else, to kind of give them a little love. You take them to a love doctor. Be like, hey, bro, you got to love people. Stop the gossip. Stop lushing about people, right? Get the love going. The Kohen shall look at the lesion on the skin of his flesh, examines it, and if hair in the lesion is turned white and the appearance of the lesion is deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a lesion of tzarat. When the Kohen sees this, he shall pronounce him unclean, impure. But if it is a white baheret on the skin of his flesh, and its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and its hair is not turned white, the Kohen shall quarantine the person with the lesion for 7 days. And on the 7th day, the Kohen shall see him again. And behold, the lesion has remained the same in its appearance. The lesion has not spread on the skin. So the Kohen shall quarantine him for 7 days a second time. And now we have a cliffhanger. Great. Now what? What do we do after 2 sets of indecisive potential tzaraat? We'll get to that tomorrow. But the main thing that I wanted to do is, number 1, get into the conversation a little bit, but also number 2, start the conversation about the Kohen, the role of the Kohen. Again, we're not talking about something physical. You don't need to go see a doctor for this. I mean, what's going to happen? The doctor can't cure it. It's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. So you got to go to a spiritual doctor, and you go to a Kohen because a Kohen is somebody who is obsessed with love and loving the other. A Kohen, by the way, a Kohen cannot bless the people if he has any animosity in his heart. That's something that I know for a fact my grandfather took seriously. My grandfather never had a bad word to say about anybody. He was the Gabe of the shul. That means he gave out the aliyahs. He was like the one who decided who got what and who led the services. And, that's a very, that could be a very dramatic job in a synagogue. And when I say dramatic, I mean like high school drama, like, oh, you didn't call me up to the Torah and you gave that person instead of me. And he was the ultimate peacemaker. He was in that position, and he was the ultimate peacemaker. And I mean, stories to no end about him, like, and behind closed doors, always respectful, always with love. And he took it seriously as a mandate, as being a Kohen. He was a Kohen. As a mandate, as a Kohen, he took this seriously. He would get up there to Duchen on the holidays to bless the people. We do the blessing with the talis, with the hand and everything, with the priestly blessing. He took it seriously. If you have any animosity, you can't be up there even to one person in the synagogue. You can't bless the people. It has to be with pure love. So this guy who's gossiping, oh, you heard about this, you heard about that, you heard about the other. Go speak to a Kohen. That's who you need advice from, not a doctor for right now. You need to speak to a Kohen to understand what it means to really love someone else and care about them, and not speak negatively about someone else. That's not nice. Simply not nice to speak not nice about somebody else. It means that we don't care. It means that we're cold and callous, and that's not a good thing. All right, tomorrow we are going to pick this conversation back up. Oh, you see, I have here the Gutnick edition, and the one that we use in Shul, and here we have some translations. A white blotch, a creamy blotch, a bright spot. Good. Tomorrow, we get into the nitty-gritty of tzaraat and see what happens when it is tzaraat, for sure. What happens when it's on the fence, right? What do we do then? Tomorrow, we continue this narrative to identify it. But just know this impurity is also a displacement of life, because speaking ill of someone, right, embarrasses them, can hurt them. It's distancing ourselves from another human being. There is a displacement of life here, which is why the person is rendered unclean and impure. Same idea. Every time we see impurity, it means something is happening in that little seismographer.
Is it making the object of the gossip impure?
No, it doesn't. No. Although it says, the Talmud says that Lashon Hara kills 3 people.
Right.
I mean, it's using a little bit of, it says kills 3 people. The one who says it, the one who heard it, and the one who it's about. But no, the one who it's about does not get tzaraat back in the day. Only the one who's
the one who it's about should get some kind of extra.
Yeah, you would think extra blessing or whatever it is, but it hurts. It hurts.
That's what I'm saying.
A person's reputation could get destroyed.
That's what I'm saying. And emotionally.
It says their face turns white out of embarrassment. It's like you killed them, or it turns red out of embarrassment. Whatever. It's really not a good thing. So as we'll go through this week. Listen, we have a few days to talk about this. We're gonna always keep in mind that this is not just a physical thing. It's not a physical thing. It's manifesting as a physical thing, but it's a spiritual thing. By the way, even in healthcare today, we know that physical stuff oftentimes a manifestation of what's going on, right? My back is hurting. All right. What stresses are going on? I mean, it's not like, okay, oh, did you lift heavy weights? That's one possibility. Or
that was our topic on Thursday night.
Thursday night, she said that, and I didn't even read that book. But what was it called? The Body Remembers or something? Body as a Memory, or whatever that book was called, or Body, whatever. I don't remember it. But the point is that or the body keeps the score, something like that. But we know today, even in literal medicine, that a lot of stuff can come from psychological, emotional stuff. And so this is a spiritual cause for very physical manifestation. Obviously, the solution is not Neutrogena or I don't know, whatever. I don't know, whatever. That's for dry skin, But the solution for this is going to be schmoozing with a Kohen and a little timeout, as we'll see tomorrow. Because
this is one of my favorite discussions about in the Torah.
It's a good discussion. All right, to be continued tomorrow. We'll let everybody go. All right, great to see everyone. Oh, a quick announcement. Tonight, there is the second part of the parenting masterclass led by the Schustermans, Rabbi and Dina. And then tomorrow, DPP, tomorrow night, you be the judge. We have a great class tomorrow night. And otherwise, the show rolls on. Well, we put up a few new things on the website. Check it out. We put up a Passover boot camp. We also put up Jewish Wisdom to Heal the Earth, a very special session on Judaism and the environment. So join us for all those. Check them out. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right. See you soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure. Bye, guys. See you.